Hello and welcome to the National Assembly. We're honored to have Thomas Gassilout with us. Hello, Thomas.
Welcome to the Assembly.
Thank you, Thomas Gassilout, former President of the Defense Committee of the National Assembly. Today, you write reports that make the news. Maybe we'll go into your office? There were quite a few interesting points in the report you released a few months ago, which was a bit prophetic. It's been a few years, so remember, Thomas is a former mountain infantryman. Check out the videos we made together in that setting. So there's a reality from the field that seeps in and also shows through in what you write. We use informal language with each other in real life, not to seem cool, but because that's how we actually talk. Back then, you started sounding the alarm quite some time ago. Yes.
I was the Army Rapporteur from 2017 to 2022, and in 2022 submitted a report on national resilience. That was after the COVID crisis and before the ongoing war in Ukraine, particularly concerning the government's released crisis manual. Before summer, I submitted a report suggesting a hybridization of the armed forces, which now includes the new national service announcement and strengthening the reserves.
We'll discuss it now, plus we have the best office. I'll link this parliamentary report in the video comments for you to check out. It's from June, and much has happened since then. Can you remind us of your main points?
So the main ideas are mainly about saying that today we need numbers beyond just coherence. You know, in 2017 we voted for a ULPM and we've voted for a second one since then. In 2022 we've prioritized capability coherence over quantity and reactivity over endurance. This report states that given today's context we must rebuild numbers and suggests ways to do so within a controlled budget.
That means refocusing forces on their core mission and dropping costly projects that no longer fit the current reality. Concretely?
That is to say, acknowledging that technology is of course important, that France is fortunate to have deterrence, it is fortunate to have technological mastery, it is fortunate to be able to have an expeditionary capability to deploy a few thousand men on limited and chosen operations. But the international context today requires us to regain the ability to deploy many men at the same time. Be resilient, not just face shocks.
What does that mean? Are we abandoning missions where our soldiers serve as Disneyland security guards?
So I specifically suggested suspending Operation Sentinel, which in fact no longer seems completely suited to today's context. In any case, which has lasted, in my opinion, for too long, and where we need to bring back some responsiveness. The main proposal is to change how our armed forces operate, emphasizing the need for a mix of capabilities today. Not only very high-tech equipment, which are decisive weapons, but also more low-cost equipment, more readily available, which allows us to achieve a mix of capabilities with both technology and quantity. If you like, we can clarify what that means for different domains, sea, land, or air.
Very concretely, let's talk about the desert. We'll start there. We're happy with the Rafale, but we need a combat drone and the Rafale F5 standard. We won't compromise on these.
Of course.
The Eurodrone, which has been criticized for quite some time. We realize that this drone, which costs more than 100 million euros per unit, is so big that it's unsuitable for a high-intensity conflict. Maybe it will eventually be able to do maritime patrol, but what do we do with it?
It's a bit like the example of an old program that took a long time to be implemented and might already be outdated by the time it's delivered. So, what I'm proposing in the report is to study the conditions for exiting the Eurodrone to see what's feasible. We don't have all the costs yet. We have the program costs and know France is contributing 2 billion euros. But bringing Eurodrones into our forces will mean new hangars, new training, a lot of logistics indeed for an operational effect that still needs to be achieved. To demonstrate. So this is extremely important in our armament programs. Now it's about getting back into the habit of thinking things through. What is the operational return on investment for the euros I invest in this program, especially over 30 years? Sometimes the need to maintain skills in the defense industrial and technological base influence program choices.
We created programs to retain talent in design offices and speed up progress. The timing is perfect.
Payroll, dividend, budget cuts. So the programs were created to maintain skills, and we actually did pretty well. Since today we have the skills, it's easier to regain numbers when you already have the skills than to regain skills when you only have the numbers.
So, we have the skills, we have the technologies, we have the brains, but the problem is, to achieve scale, you need to have acceptable operating and production costs. I often mention that a first-person view kamikaze drone costs 500 euros, while an anti-tank missile costs 200,000 to 250,000 euros each. French volunteer operators in Ukraine consider this equipment suicidal. Why produce 250,000 anti-tank missiles instead of 500 more effective kamikaze drones?
Because we need both. Anti-tank missiles remain very useful. You're referring to the missile moyenne portée, a medium-range missile that enables indirect, highly accurate fire. And sometimes we need to use this kind of missile to hit high-value targets. But this technological equipment needs to be complemented by more low-cost attrition weapons, which allow us to saturate the battlefield. So what we need to find today is the right balance between these attrition weapons and these mass weapons. For drones, for example, as you mentioned, 500 euros each. We propose in our report that each officer, cadet and non-commissioned officer, roughly 5,000 students annually build their own drone. If you calculate it, 5,000 students yearly at 500 euros per drone totals 2.5 million per year, the price of an advanced missile. We could adjust how quickly our armed forces adopt these technologies.
Recent developments and major decisions, like the voluntary national service, are examples of what was premonitively mentioned in your report. Is it being done today in a way that seems coherent?
So indeed, we've talked a lot about high-low capacity mix, but there's also, if I may say so, a human high-low mix. That is to say, we need active personnel who are extremely professional, very technical in their approach to the profession of arms. But we also need a hybridization with human capabilities, either from reservists or volunteers, so it can be done. With the increased reserve, we aim to double operational reservists to 100,000 for 200,000 active duty personnel. The President of the Republic announced last Thursday the implementation of national service. This will let us have volunteers in our armed forces serve about 10 months before moving to the reserve or active duty.
And here, the feedback in military terms really corresponds to a real need?
It does indeed correspond to a need, since we not only need more manpower, but we also need the skills that come from the civilian sector. With the old-style military service, engineers, for example, contributed their expertise. It's especially useful today, given major technological advancements and the need to integrate dual-use technologies into the armed forces.
Could we set up a volunteer program for engineers? For instance, engineers on the channel tell me, I've just retired after 40 years developing antennas. I have a PhD. Number one in antennas. Unsure where to spend my time? I give it to Ukraine, which is great since volunteer engineers support its defense industry. Could we imagine this system in France?
Good idea. Since there's the Directors Guild of America's Industrial Reserve, we should tell engineers to join it. And the armed forces within the food units are increasingly interested to also integrate technological capabilities so they can develop certain everyday products themselves. Moreover, regarding the army, they have subsidiarity funds of about 150,000 euros per year per unit to be able to develop and have local capability developments.
That means a unit itself, without going through the General Directorate of Armaments, can decide to buy some drones to make its own.
Some units, for example, have bought electric motorcycles for infiltration, and some have bought protection capabilities. It's still quite limited today, but it's pretty new. And what I'm proposing in the report is to accelerate subsidiarity, to decentralize the funding. Of course, we need innovation from the Directors Guild of America for long-term programs, for major structuring programs, especially around deterrence. But we also need to decentralize part of the funding, to give local players the ability to also develop certain products, to also take advantage of opportunities they have with companies in their area. For example, if I take the 27th Mountain Infantry Brigade in Grenoble, there's a whole ecosystem in Grenoble around extreme cold and mountain sports. These same pieces of equipment can be used by our alpine troops to be able to last longer, to have more mobility in extreme cold areas. And so, innovation. It happens at the central level with the Directors Guild of America, but today it also needs to happen more on the ground.
In Ukraine, each brigade operates autonomously, making independent purchasing decisions under monitored acquisitions. Tracked, enabling identification of the best small players among many. That's another element too. That means we don't need to cut the budget by half to cut the power by half.
And no, I actually think that with this Relo mix, we can regain capabilities, regain strength, without blowing up the budgets. In a way, what we need to understand about the last 30 years is that not only did the peace dividends lead to budget cuts, but the unit costs of armaments have skyrocketed. Earlier, you mentioned the anti-tank missile, which now costs over 200,000 euros each, while 10 or 15 years ago, the Milan was about 7,000 euros. We could look at the cost of tanks, the cost of planes, the cost of ships. Every unit price has skyrocketed. So not only did we have less budget, but the equipment became more expensive. And for example, we went from 1,200 tanks to 200 tanks, from 450 planes to 200 planes. We're doubling the defense budget by 2030, but we'll still have fewer tanks, ships, and planes. And so it's also the end of this cycle, which is well described by Augustine's law, that we need to start changing today. By saying, of course, we need expensive equipment because technology makes the difference, but we also need to complement this equipment with more basic gear, mass smart tech in a way.
So, we also need to let ourselves buy off-the-shelf civilian sensors available in Canada, even if the equipment isn't fully sovereign.
Indeed, if we're talking about consumables, we need to think more broadly about better integrating our civilian production capabilities. I'll continue on the topic of drones. Today, indeed, we don't have mass production of drones. If this product is strategic, and I believe it is, we should consider what entry barriers to set for our civilian market at the European level to protect the drone manufacturing industry in Europe. And we need to be upfront with our fellow citizens by saying, listen, if you want to take photos on your vacation, you'll pay a little more for a drone, but it will be a European drone. And that's strategic because our armed forces need them as well.
So, there's an issue of industrial sovereignty that adds to this need to ramp up. That means we're counting on the mass of European consumers to keep buying and to lower the cost of products that could have dual uses. Is this something that's currently being followed by some of your fellow deputies, or is it really just a personal utopia?
It's something we're trying to push. It's simply saying we have our defense industry companies that are very important. But today, a more global industrial effort from the nation is needed. Let's also keep the big picture in mind. The European Union spends a few billion euros on defense R&D. The Americans have 10 times more, several tens of billions of euros in the United States Department of Defense, and the big tech companies have 100 times more. That means it's hundreds of billions of euros per year in R&D specifically targeted at cyber. So we can clearly see that our defense R&D efforts need to be complemented by all the R&D that can be done at the French and European levels. And we need to complement and really combine civilian production resources. For example, if I take the automotive industry, with a car computer, we can do a lot of things. For a missile with a Clio engine, we can do a lot of things. And so we need not only the missile, sometimes maybe costing several million euros to hit a target very precisely, to operate in very degraded environments. But we also need to manufacture missiles, sometimes with civilian components and civilian industrial capabilities, sometimes to saturate the space and intelligently combine the two. Basically sending a lot of low-cost missiles to wear down air defenses, saturate the enemy, and then have a precision missile come in as a complement.
In theory, it's great, but in practice, we're told it will happen in 2 years, in 3 years. I'll take the example of the Serval anti-drone system. It will be delivered in 2028 to be tested by the Directors Guild of America and may be certified in 2031. So, mass industrial production will come after the period during which all European intelligence services say the Russians might attack us, 2028, 2029. While we're waiting for our manufacturers to be ready, couldn't we start right away by buying what's operational, what works, what has been proven in Ukraine?
The timeline is the key point. Admiral Vendier explains it very well. We need to end these years-long armament programs, but for highly specific ones, especially for deterrence, if I consider very simple programs. Here, in 2018, the Chief of Staff of the Army told us that we needed to renew our basic Army trucks. We're only now awarding the contract for trucks that will be delivered in several years. 7 years later, and so it will take 10 years between the expression of the need for simple equipment and the delivery of the material. Ukrainians order trucks from us with a one-page purchase order and receive them in 6 months. So indeed, we need to find simplicity again in the way we do things. So avoid overspecification with products that will be immediately operational, which might not meet 100% of the need, but at least will be ready quickly, and that we can upgrade if necessary.
Like a minimum viable project that evolves. Next, what are the Ukrainians doing? I saw, however, that you weren't necessarily completely satisfied with the choice that was made for this massive logistics equipment with thousands of trucks that will equip the army.
Can you explain this choice today then? It hasn't been made yet. Simply, there was a call for tenders with many criteria, a call for tenders of several hundred pages with hundreds of requirements as well. And unfortunately, this call for tenders could lead to choosing a foreign truck manufacturer. Now, what I think is that we have two manufacturers in France, Renault Trucks and Scania in Angers. Renault Trucks mainly in Lyon and Scania in Angers. And it is extremely important that our public contracts can prioritize national orders. It's an issue not only, of course, of industrial sovereignty, because when we order nationally, it's about taxes, jobs, it's engineers that we're supporting, but it also addresses military needs requiring close cooperation between forces and industry, as well as the ability to quickly expand capabilities. Basically, we're not only buying trucks at a given moment, but we're also buying the ability to have a lot more if needed. If we need to make an effort in the face of a major engagement,
shouldn't we give up some of our specificities too? After all, we're also considering things like rockets. We're the only country with 68 mmR rockets, while neighbors like Thales in Belgium use 70 mmR rockets. Since they sell them all over the world, to India, they can afford to do self-financed R&D, and their equipment is more efficient and cheaper than what we buy in 68 meters. Shouldn't we, at some point, also say that we made certain choices at one time? Now we need to go back to the European standard?
Standardization, NATO helps with this by unifying calibers and procedures. Everyone uses 156 caliber because of NATO. And to avoid overspecification, I think a great example for these two criteria is the Caesar cannon. We use a 155 shell since it's the NATO standard and our product isn't overspecified. When the Caesar was launched, nobody wanted it. Everyone wanted something much more complex, armored, on tracks, with a lot more electronics. The manufacturer made a simple product, and today this simple product proves to be very effective, much more effective than if we had overspecified this cannon.
I have one last question, maybe a bit politically incorrect. Many French manufacturers have great ideas, but it takes them 3 years of procedures and authorizations with the Armament Directorate to try them in Ukraine. There comes a time when we see our counterparts, our German, Italian and Australian competitors. When we go to Ukraine, when we're on the ground, we see that plenty of foreign companies are running tests. When we talk to the French, they say they're still waiting for authorization from the administration. Can't we fix that?
But even worse than going to Ukraine to test the patroller drone, we couldn't do it in France. We had to go to Finland to test this drone with all the costs and delays that came with it. What you have to understand is that the dividends of peace not only led to a decrease in budgets, but also resulted in excessive standardization. With no major border risks, we focused on reducing minor ones. Now, this excessive standardization has even impacted our armies. They restrict themselves from many things to comply with strict rules. We're increasing budgets again, but we also need to change how we do things to free ourselves from certain regulations. Because when it comes to military matters, there's only one thing that ultimately counts, and that's the operational effect we're able to produce to defend our country.
We're changing the Directors Guild of America, reducing constraints and accelerating the Defense Innovation Agency.
We're willing to take risks. We're willing to have products that are less specified but immediately available, and that we can produce in large quantities. We reassure buyers by saying we're asking you to take some risks. You won't have any criminal liability if sometimes you make mistakes because we're asking you to take risks. And that's a whole cultural shift that's necessary. Already, as Sébastien Lecornu initiated with the Vele Petit speech, and within the forces to be in a constant process of evolution, there is no set goal to reach. There is a new mindset to adopt in order to maximize our operational potential.
Another point about adapting with available equipment, let me return to the example. At the D4 dinner a few weeks ago, I described the situation. When Ukrainians face trench warfare, they buy small toy trucks for children at supermarkets. They load 40 kilos of explosives and send them into the opposing trench. Result, a kamikaze drone for 150 euros. Would we accept today to just buy things off the shelf like that? Equipment that we repurpose from its original use, like what we're doing today?
Yes, that's what we call innovation in usage. So yes, I think we're starting to do it a little, but we need to do it more. And all of this goes through different purchasing processes, with field units regaining this ability through subsidiarity budgets. That's it. Once again, I'm suggesting that each unit should have its subsidiarity budget doubled. It's not much, it's 300,000 euros per year per unit. Even when you multiply it by the number of units, it's still a relatively small budget. And I think that the chiefs of staff, also from the 3 branches of the military, need to regain purchasing power without necessarily going through very lengthy procedures.
Last question, also controversial. France has 200,000 military personnel under 100,000 in the army and only 10,000 deployable. Is that so? Is this ratio acceptable?
Many remain in a constant operational posture on land, sea or air. But yes, we clearly need to redeploy more people. We've gotten used to working with limited engagement. We need to regain the ability to handle a shock, to be able to send a lot of people at once. We need to equip all our soldiers, even though we've sometimes handled training and operational equipment separately. We need to make sure that every unit is equipped. We must properly equip our soldiers, our reservists, and we also need to rely on all the capabilities that exist. I mean the National Gendarmerie, an armed force with military status. In a major engagement, the National Gendarmerie will play a key role in the operational defense of the territory. We also need to consider the Gendarmerie's current capabilities, particularly long guns and tactical mobility, which have largely diminished over the past 20 years.
There's also the issue of cognitive rearmament, which might not be up to you. The will and ability to fight or build a nation, these are words we hear often.
It depends completely. That was actually the theme of my report on national resilience. Personally, I think that willpower is at least as important as our capabilities. And in that regard, we have lessons to learn from the Finns and the Swedes. Our capabilities allow us to achieve willpower at a lower material or human cost, but the one who wins the war in the end is the one who wants to win it.
And you're talking about countries that started working on disinformation very early. I could add Taiwan to that list, by the way. These countries teach their youth about these issues and officially permit themselves to challenge the narrative. Enemies. Because here we have to call things as they are. From Russia towards France, there is a small beginning of a response that is starting to be seen.
Yes, I think our solution should keep the French strategy, deterrence, 200,000 active military, and adopt some Finnish approaches too. In the ability to mobilize all the vital forces of the nation to achieve a common defense objective. And by combining these two strategies, I think we will best achieve our defense objectives.
Come on, join the operational reserve. You'll see we do a lot of great things. Once again, I repeat, I'm at the Army General Staff. Everyone can find a place, whether you're a driver for big trucks, a young athletic person, or an engineer who's a bit of a geek with glasses. There's work for everyone.
Every French person has a role, even if not in the reserve. I like this Saint-Exupéry quote, "Every century is responsible for the whole empire," or put differently, every French person is personally responsible for defense. Defense concerns everyone. As French citizens, whether business owners, bankers, mayors, or community members, you all have a role. You are the ones who decide the resources our armed forces have. You are the ones who decide who will be the head of the armed forces tomorrow. Each of you has abilities useful for defending our country.
We can't just choose to stay at peace. We try to declare it, but it rarely works. Napoleon tried to declare peace in 1999, but the coalitions disagreed. Today I repeat it because that's something that Russian disinformation has managed to spread. No one wants war. If it happens, it's to defend ourselves and our allies under agreement from potential attacks. That's why we must rearm now.
Peace requires cooperation, but war can be started by one. Simply wanting peace doesn't ensure security. That's why we urgently need to prepare for all possible options. One of our political responsibilities is to explain to citizens what this defense effort involves. It is necessary and how it is consistent with the strategy that we all want for peace.
Thomas, thank you. We hope you enjoyed it and see you soon.